They say there are places in America where the land remembers. Places where the trees don't just grow, they watch. The Ozarks, in 1893, were one of those places. Thick forests that swallowed sound, dirt roads that turned to rivers of mud with every storm, and families that lived so deep within the hills they forgot there was a world beyond them. But the Price family, they were different. Not just isolated. Not just poor. Theirs was a name spoken only in whispers, a family so cut off from the world that when outsiders stumbled near their land, they'd turn back before nightfall. No one had to tell them to. The silence did. The smell of iron and smoke, the strange figures glimpsed through the trees, those were enough. For years, people said the Prices were a clan of ghosts. That they'd all died in the cholera years, their homestead reclaimed by the woods. But in the summer of 1893, when the drought came, the truth clawed its way back to the surface, and it wasn't the dead anyone had to fear. A traveling preacher was the first to find them. His name's mostly lost now, buried under misfiled church records and missing journals. But one letter remains, a letter written in shaky pen, mailed from a small post office in Newton County. It was found decades later, sealed in a wooden box with the word "deliver" carved into the lid. It began like this. They are still here. God help me, I've seen them. He wrote that the Prices lived 3 miles off the main road, in a hollow cut by a creek that never dried. There were no paths, no fences, only the faint line of wagon ruts and the sound of running water. When he reached the clearing, he saw what looked like a collection of barns and sheds, all collapsing inward, built from rotted oak and bone-white timber. Smoke rose from one chimney, but there was no sound of life. No voices. No animals. Not even birds. When he finally saw the family, he said, it was like looking upon a mirror of human ruin. The Prices numbered 9. 3 generations, though it was near impossible to tell who belonged to which. Their faces were thin and pale, their eyes a startling gray-blue, like water that had never seen the sun. The eldest, a woman called Maylene, was said to have hair down to her knees, color of rust, and a mouth that never closed fully, as if her jaw had set wrong long ago. The preacher was offered food, but he refused. The smell of the stew, a coppery sweetness he couldn't place, made his stomach twist. He stayed one night, praying quietly by his bed, though he said later it felt like the walls themselves were whispering. By dawn, he was gone. No one saw him again. Only the letter remained, a relic of a man who had wandered too far into the hills and glimpsed something civilization had long since buried. Locals called that place Price Hollow, but in the records, it appears under another name, the Hollow Settlement, marked as abandoned after 1864. That's where the trail should have ended. But it didn't. A year after the preacher vanished, a small team of surveyors from Springfield came through the region, charting land for a potential rail spur. They found the same creek, the same hills, and the same clearing. But what they found there wasn't just a homestead. There were cages. Handmade, woven from saplings, bound with rawhide and sinew. Inside them, small bones. Not animal. Not all of them, anyway. And beneath the largest oak, a grave marked with stones arranged in a perfect spiral. The foreman's journal notes only one phrase. Something was born here that never should have been. After that entry, there's nothing. Pages torn out. The survey map ends abruptly at the creek line. For a long time, the story sat like rot in the soil, whispered at campfires, warned to travelers. The Prices became legend. Don't go near Price Hollow after dark, they'd say. They can smell new blood. But legends always come from something real. And if you dig deep enough into county records, faded census notes, and birth registries half burned in courthouse fires, you'll find traces of them. In 1871, a single birth recorded under unknown paternity. In 1874, a death with no cause listed, only the note, internal malformation, consistent with familial defect. In 1880, a census taker wrote that the residents of the Hollow exhibit signs of severe consanguinity, the polite term for inbreeding. That was the year the government stopped sending people out that way. No schools. No doctors. No law. Just the Hollow and whatever lived inside it. But that's where the story begins to twist, because even after the Prices were believed to be gone, people kept reporting sightings. A woman, barefoot and pale, wandering near the river with a dead baby in her arms. A young boy found near the timberline, unable to speak, his eyes reflecting light like an animal's. The sheriff's report from 1893 describes deformities inconsistent with normal human development, and ends with a line that still chills the blood. The subject appears to have been born of kin to kin, many generations removed from outside blood. The implication was clear, the Prices had turned inward. Not just socially, but biologically. The gene pool had folded in on itself, generation after generation, until nature itself began to rebel. They'd become a family that time refused to kill, a lineage so cut off, it survived only through its own corruption. And maybe that's why the stories linger. Because what they did in that hollow wasn't just survival. It was a kind of worship, of blood, of lineage, of something older than human law. Old photographs, if you can find them, show the land still barren where the homestead once stood. No grass grows there. Locals swear the soil is sour, the air heavier, as if whatever happened there left a stain too deep for the world to wash away. There's one more thing from that letter. A sentence the preacher wrote just before the ink trailed off, his last words before disappearing into the woods forever. They do not fear death, for they have already met it, and it wears their face. The rest of the page is soaked through, maybe rain, maybe something else. But the message remains, the Prices were more than a lost family. They were a warning. A reminder that sometimes, when we turn our backs on the forgotten corners of this country, those corners start to grow teeth. And in 1893, the Ozarks had plenty of them. By the time the century turned, Price Hollow had vanished from most maps. Roads changed, rivers shifted, and new names covered the old scars. But for those who lived in the hills, the hunters, the trappers, the ones who made their lives in silence, the memory of that family never really went away. It just sank deeper, like a bone swallowed by the earth. They say the land around the hollow never healed. No birds nested there, no wildflowers bloomed. Dogs would refuse to go near it, whining and backing away with their tails between their legs. And when storms rolled through the Ozarks, thunder would break above that patch of forest first, as if the sky still remembered what had been done beneath it. Around 1902, a prospector by the name of Benjamin Hall was cutting through the region looking for quartz veins when he stumbled across the remains of the Price homestead. What he described in his journal should have been impossible, because the Prices were supposed to be dead for nearly a decade. He wrote of a figure standing in the clearing, watching him from behind the skeleton of a collapsed barn. Tall, thin, covered in something that looked like ash. Its eyes were wide and unblinking, and its mouth moved soundlessly. When Hall called out, the figure stepped back, not into the shadows, but straight down, as if the ground itself opened to swallow it. He dropped his pickaxe and ran. 2 weeks later, he was found dead in his cabin outside Eureka Springs. The cause of death was ruled self-inflicted wounds. But the coroner's notes include a line that no one ever explained: tongue and jaw severely lacerated, appears consistent with self-mutilation or foreign object removal. It's easy to dismiss a story like that. Madness, superstition, isolation, they all fit neatly into the narrative of frontier fear. But when the same story appears again, word for word, in a different man's notes 20 years later, you start to wonder. That man was Dr. Warren C. Mallory, a physician working with the State Sanitary Commission during the influenza epidemic of 1918. His team was tasked with documenting rural deaths in southern Missouri. In his report, dated September 12, he wrote that several unidentified human remains had been found near a dried creek bed in Newton County. The skeletons showed extreme deformities, fused bones, underdeveloped skulls, evidence of genetic disorder, suggesting multiple generations of inbreeding. The bodies were buried shallow. Around them, carvings in wood and stone. Circles within circles. Spirals. Mallory wrote that the markings seemed to follow no Christian symbol he recognized, though one of his assistants claimed they resembled something closer to pagan worship than burial. After that, the report ends abruptly. The next page of the state archive is missing. But in the margins of that last surviving page, in faded pencil, Mallory had written 3 words, "The blood remembers." That phrase became something of a curse among the locals. A way to explain the inexplicable. Livestock vanishing. Children born with strange eyes. The occasional scream heard echoing through the woods. Whenever something couldn't be explained, people would whisper, "The blood remembers." There's a reason that phrase still haunts the Ozarks. Because what if memory isn't just in the mind? What if it's in the body, carried down through blood, generation after generation, like a hidden infection waiting for the right moment to resurface? That's what the price is left behind. Not ghosts, not monsters, but a living memory, twisted, buried, and inherited. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you try to cleanse it, or would you keep it hidden? Around 1934, a Works Progress Administration crew clearing forest trails near Buffalo Creek uncovered what they first believed to be animal burrows. But when they widened the opening, they found a chamber carved into the rock, man-made. Inside were relics, buttons, teeth, and a rusted pocket watch engraved with the initials MP. Maylene Price. No one wanted to believe it. The site was quietly sealed, covered with concrete, and the official report was classified as mining debris. But a local worker who was there that day told his grandson a different story, that inside the chamber, they found small skeletons curled together in a circle, facing inward, hands touching. Not buried. Arranged. He said their skulls were small but human. And their teeth were wrong. After that discovery, strange things began to happen in the nearby town of Neosho. Children spoke of a woman watching them from the tree line at dusk. A farmer's daughter disappeared for 3 days and returned barefoot, silent, her dress covered in gray mud she couldn't remember walking through. The sheriff wrote that she repeated the same phrase over and over again, "She said the hollow is hungry again." It's easy to turn away from a story like this. To say it's folklore, hysteria, the rural mind trying to explain cruelty through myth. But what if it wasn't myth at all? What if the Prices never truly died, not in the way we think of death? If you trace certain family names in the region today, small, unremarkable names, often ending in son or, you'll find something unsettling. They all lead back to one place. The same 3-mile patch of forest. The same creek. The same hollow. Geneticists studying isolated populations have long noted that certain recessive traits, like unusual eye color, bone structure, and even patterns of behavior, can persist for hundreds of years if left unbroken by outside blood. So when old photographs surface from Newton County, the ones too distorted to identify, the faces too similar to tell apart, it raises a question no one really wants to answer. What if the Prices are still there? Not as monsters, not as myths, but as descendants, diluted, scattered, still carrying a trace of that ancient isolation in their blood. Because every few decades, reports still surface. A strange family living off the grid. Children who don't attend school. People with names that don't appear on any record, homes that don't exist on maps. And when investigators go looking, the trail always ends the same way: a washed-out road, a dried creek bed, a clearing choked with trees. Price Hollow, they say, always finds its way back. And maybe that's because time doesn't move forward there. Maybe it circles, a spiral, like the graves under the oak tree. A pattern that keeps repeating, waiting for someone foolish enough to look too closely. Because that's how the hollow works. It doesn't haunt you with what's dead. It makes you remember what should have stayed buried. There's a photograph, black and white, faded at the corners, found in a courthouse attic in Joplin sometime in the 1960s. It shows a group of 5 people standing in front of a wooden shack, their faces half lost to light. On the back, in handwriting so faint it can barely be read, are the words, Price Hollow, Summer of '93. At first glance, it looks ordinary. Farmers, maybe. Rural folk, hard times, hard lives. But when you stare longer, something begins to feel wrong. The woman in the center, her eyes are too far apart. The man beside her has a jaw that hangs slightly open, showing teeth too numerous for a human mouth. And the smallest figure, a child holding a doll, its hand is gripping the doll's neck, not by accident, but with purpose. The man who found that photograph said he heard whispering when he touched it. Like voices pressed between the paper fibers, waiting to breathe again. He burned it the same night. But copies circulate still. A few researchers claim to have seen the original before it was destroyed. They say there were shapes behind the family in the photo, faint outlines, like figures standing in the doorway, watching. And if you inverted the colors, a second face appeared over the little girl's shoulder, blurred, hollow-eyed, mouth open wide. The truth is, we don't really know what happened to the Prices. Some say the family line died out by the early 1900s. Others believe it never ended, that they simply sank deeper, burrowing into the land that had already claimed them. But every generation seems to rediscover them. A hunter here, a hiker there, someone lost on a back road who swears they saw light through the trees where no house should have been. In 1952, 2 brothers exploring the hills found a rusted door set into the side of a limestone ridge. They thought it was an old root cellar, until they opened it. Inside was a tunnel, carved smooth, running straight into the rock. They only went 10 feet before the air turned foul, heavy with rot. Then they saw something on the wall, handprints. Hundreds of them. Small. Pressed into the mud. They sealed the door and never returned. Their story was passed down through the family, and decades later, when one of their grandsons joined the sheriff's department, he tried to find that door again. He never did. But he said sometimes, when he was deep in those woods on patrol, his flashlight would catch something pale between the trees, a hand, maybe. Or a face. Gone the moment he blinked. He stopped going alone after that. There's a theory among local historians, though few will speak it aloud, that the Prices weren't just victims of isolation. That they chose it. That they'd made a covenant of sorts, long before the Civil War, with something they found in the hollow. It's said there are caverns under the Ozarks that go for miles, rivers running through black stone, passages older than the mountains themselves. Native legends warned settlers to stay away from them, calling them the breathing places of the earth. But the Prices went down there. And they brought something back. Old records tell of strange gatherings, in the 1850s, of light seen flickering under the ground and a sickening chant that carried for miles through the trees. When a state marshal finally rode out to investigate, he found a homestead empty. Fires still burning. Meat hanging from hooks. But no people. They returned 3 days later, walking barefoot, silent, their eyes ringed with soot. The marshal's report ends with one line. They have been changed. From then on, the family stopped marrying outsiders. No new names entered their ledger. It was as if they were guarding something, or keeping it trapped inside themselves. That's the real horror of the prices. They weren't cursed by accident. They invited it in. And maybe that's why time refuses to let them die. Because when a family binds itself not to the living world but to something beneath it, something ancient, nameless, and patient, the usual rules of decay don't apply. Blood becomes an altar. Flesh becomes inheritance. You can see the echoes of it even now. A farmhouse that burns down for no reason. A missing person found months later with dirt packed under their fingernails and no memory of where they've been. Strange spiral carvings appearing on trees near old homesteads, as if someone's been marking territory no one else can see. Those are all stories that lead back, in some way, to the same creek, the same hollow, the same forgotten name. Maybe the prices aren't people anymore. Maybe there's something the land made to remember itself, a living memory of isolation, hunger, and kinship turned inward. Or maybe they're still out there, in the deeper parts of the Ozarks, where no road dares to reach. Watching. Waiting for the world to forget them again so they can begin the cycle anew. And if you ever find yourself driving those back roads at night, the kind with no cell service, no lights, and no sound but the whisper of trees, remember this: the hollow isn't gone. It's just quiet. Some nights, if the wind's right, you can still hear the creek running. And if you listen closely, beneath the water's murmur, you might hear another sound, a low humming, like voices singing in the dark. That's when you turn around. You don't follow it. You don't stop. You drive until the trees thin and the stars come back. Because if you don't, if you linger long enough for the air to change, you'll start to smell that same copper sweetness the preacher wrote about in 1893. And if you smell that, it's already too late. Because the hollow doesn't need to find you. You've already found it. And the blood always remembers.